A loud sharp cry pierced through the small dimly lit room. Alex had arrived. Omalicha, exhausted from hours of labor, held her newborn baby tightly. She looked down at him with a weak but proud smile. His tiny hands, his soft cheeks, he was her miracle, she said. But as Omalicha marveled at her son, the room remained silent. The women around her whispered among themselves, their faces filled with shock and unease. "Why is his skin so pale?" one of them asked, her voice low but trembling. The baby's skin, almost as white as chalk, stood out in a way that was impossible to ignore. His hair was white, soft and fine like cotton. The women exchanged uneasy glances. "This is not normal," another whispered. Omalicha's husband Chikuti stood in the corner watching in silence. His face was unreadable. The room felt heavy with tension, as though the air itself had thickened. When Chikuti finally spoke, his voice was flat. "What is this?" he asked, pointing at the baby. Omalicha's heart sank. "This is our son," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But Chikuti did not come closer. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Omalicha alone with her newborn and the weight of 1,000 questions. That night, as Alex slept in her arms, Omalicha whispered to him, "You are my blessing, no matter what anyone says." Omalicha and Chikuti had once been deeply in love. They had met at a village festival years ago, where the music was loud and the air smelled of roasted corn and palm wine. Chikuti was full of life, always joking and dreaming of a better future. Omalicha was drawn to his energy, his laughter, and his promises of a life filled with happiness and adventure. They moved to Lagos shortly after they got married, hoping for a fresh start in the bustling city. But Lagos was not kind to dreamers. Life in the city was hard. Chikuti worked as a carpenter, taking whatever small jobs he could find, while Omalicha sold fried akara by the roadside. They barely earned enough to eat, let alone save for the future. When Alex was born, their struggles multiplied. Chikuti became distant, spending more time away from home. He stopped talking about his dreams and started complaining about their misfortunes. The whispers from neighbors and relatives about Alex's albinism didn't help. "Is he even your child?" one man had asked Chikuti. The question, though absurd, gnawed at him. By the time Alex was 6 months old, Chikuti had left. He didn't say goodbye. He simply packed his belongings one evening and walked out the door, leaving Omalicha to fend for herself and her 3 children. Omalicha cried that night, but by morning she had wiped her tears. "I will not let this break me," she told herself. She had children to care for, and there was no time for self-pity. Omalicha's life became a constant struggle. She woke up before dawn every day to prepare her akara stand. She spent hours frying the bean cakes that her hands blistered from the heat of the oil. When she wasn't selling akara, she was cleaning houses or washing clothes for wealthier families. Every naira she earned went toward feeding her children and keeping a roof over their heads. Alex's needs were different from his siblings. His pale skin was extremely sensitive to the sun, and he burned easily. Omalicha saved every little bit she could to buy sunscreen for him, despite how expensive it costs. She sewed long-sleeved shirts and hats for him using old fabric scraps, determined to protect him from the harsh Lagos sun. Despite her struggles, Omalicha never let her children see her despair. She smiled when she was with them, told them stories at night, and reminded them that they were loved. She especially made sure Alex knew he was special. "You are my moon," she would tell him. "The moon doesn't shine like the sun, but it is still beautiful in its own way." Their neighborhood in Lagos was noisy and crowded. Children played football in the dusty streets, and women gossiped while selling roasted plantains. It should have been a place full of life and laughter, but for Alex, it was a place of rejection. Other children refused to play with him. "Don't touch him," one boy said. "He looks like a ghost." Another added, "My mama says he's cursed." These words hurt Alex deeply, though he tried not to show it. Instead, he would sit on the steps of their small home watching other children play from a distance. Sometimes, he would pick up a stick and draw shapes in the dirt, pretending not to care, but inside, he felt the sting of isolation. One day, Alex gathered the courage to join a group of boys playing football. He waited until they paused for a break and timidly asked, "Can I play too?" The boys exchanged glances before one of them sneered, "You can't, you'll scare the ball away." The group erupted into laughter and Alex turned away, his face burning with humiliation. The rejection extended to everyday interactions. At the local market, vendors would lower their voices when Amaka and Alex passed by, their words barely concealed. "That boy," one woman whispered, "he's not normal." Another responded, "His mother must have done something to anger the gods." The adults in the neighborhood weren't much better. Some avoided Alex altogether, refusing to greet him or even look him in the eye. Others whispered behind his back, spreading rumors about his albinism. One particularly cruel neighbor once said within earshot, "If he disappears one day, don't be surprised. People like him are good for nothing." Amaka did her best to shield Alex from the worst of it, but the whispers and stares were impossible to ignore. She often found herself comforting him after particularly harsh encounters. "They don't understand," she would say, stroking his hair. "One day they will see how special you are," she'd tell him. The rejection from the neighborhood became an almost daily ritual. Amaka found herself pleading silently each time she stepped out with Alex, hoping the day would be free of another comment or sneer. The weight of society's prejudice was crushing, but Amaka refused to let it define their lives. Every night after the house had quieted, she prayed for strength, for understanding, and for a future where her son could walk without fear. The Lagos sun was brutal, especially for Alex. His albinism made his skin extremely sensitive to sunlight, and even a short walk outside could leave him with painful burns. Amaka did everything she could to protect him, but it wasn't always enough. "Stay in the shade, Alex," Amaka would remind him every time he left the house. But shade was hard to come by in their crowded neighborhood. The narrow streets and small houses offered little refuge from the sun. Alex often came home with red blistered skin despite his mother's efforts. The heat wasn't the only challenge. Alex's eyes were also sensitive to light, making it difficult for him to see clearly during the day. He squinted constantly, which made some people think he was being rude or strange. "Why do you look like that?" a child once asked him. "Are you blind?" The question stung, but Alex didn't have an answer. He simply lowered his head and walked away. At school, the bright sunlight streaming through the classroom windows made it nearly impossible for him to read the chalkboard. Despite sitting in the front row, he often fell behind in his lessons. When Alex started school, he hoped it would be a fresh start. But school was just another place where he felt out of place. The classrooms were overcrowded, and the teachers were often impatient. Alex struggled to see the chalkboard because of his poor vision, but instead of understanding, his teachers scolded him. "Why are you so slow?" one teacher asked him during a math lesson. "Stop making excuses and do your work." The other students laughed and Alex felt his face grow hot with shame. He wanted to explain, but he didn't know how to. He just wanted to be like everyone else, but it seemed impossible. At lunchtime, Alex sat alone. The other children avoided him, whispering and pointing as they ate. One day a girl offered him a piece of her bread only to snatch it back at the last second. "My mama says I shouldn't share with you," she said before running off. Alex tried to hold back his tears, but they came anyway. The few moments of joy Alex found at school came from his love of drawing. During free periods, he would take out a pencil and paper and sketch pictures of his family, his neighborhood, or the moon his mother often compared him to. For a little while, the pain of rejection faded, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful. One afternoon, Alex overheard two teachers talking about him. "That boy won't go far," one said, her tone dismissive and sharp. "He struggles with everything, reading, writing, even keeping up in class." "It's not just his academics," the other teacher replied with a sigh. "Children like him face too many challenges. The world is not kind to them." "It's sad, really, but what can anyone do?" Alex froze in place, clutching his battered school bag. He felt the weight of their words sink into him, each one sharper than the last. He didn't know whether to feel anger, shame, or despair. Instead, he felt all three swirling inside him like a storm he couldn't control. That evening, as he sat on the steps of his home, their words replayed in his mind. "Won't go far," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. Was that true? Was he destined to fail because of who he was? He looked up at the night sky, searching for answers among the stars. His mother, noticing his unusual quietness, came to sit beside him. "What's on your mind, my moon?" she asked softly. Alex hesitated, then shared what he had overheard. "They think I won't amount to anything," he said, his voice barely audible. "Because of how I am." Omalicha wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "Alex, listen to me," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "People will always have their opinions, but they don't decide your future, you do. You are not just the moon shining quietly in the night, you are also strong and capable. The same sun that burns you also gives you light to see the path ahead. Never forget that." Her words lingered with Alex long after she left his side. That night, as he lay in bed, he made a silent promise to himself. He would prove those teachers wrong. He would fight through the pain, the rejection, and the doubts, not just for himself, but for his mother, who believed in him when no one else did.